Hey, welcome back. In the second part of this PlayCanvas tutorial, I want to cover a couple of new concepts. I'm going to just write them here behind the two forward slashes so that we can just like write a little to-do list and the code won't compile this part of it. So the first is alternative controls. So you can experiment with different control like button inputs. The second will be exposing variables that we can tweak from within the engine and we don't have to keep going back into code. It should also be a lot more consistent because you'll see here I've used the number 10. 1, 2, 3, 4. I know I've got a minus before it, but if we had a variable you could say variable and here you could say minus variable. So the same number is used 4 times. Anytime you use something more than once, you should probably create a variable so you reference it multiple, like reference this one variable multiple times. That means if you need to tweak something, you don't have to go through the script and find all of these places. Like I want that to be 15, which means I have to change these 3 as well. 15. It's really fiddly. It's better to just have one number at the top that you can just change and everything is aligned. And the last thing I want to do is I want to talk about and show some examples of things like impulses, torque. So those are the different things we can do to the rigid body. You can twist it with torque, you can like punt it with an impulse, or you can sort of move it gradually with a constant force. And the other things that we can look at is like the different ways that you can interpret button presses. So you've got things like is pressed, but you've also got things like was pressed, and you've got things like was, I believe, was released, although that's much less useful. But these two, was pressed and is pressed, are very useful because like if your condition is saying is key S pressed, you're checking this every single frame. So the game's like saying is key S pressed? Yes. Is key S pressed? Yes. Is key S pressed? Yes. So I'm going to apply this force every single time. But if you want to do something like make the character jump, you might want to use something like was pressed, because that is true much less of the time. You press the button and it'll say was the button pressed? Yes, and then it won't be true on the next frame because it wasn't, it just is pressed now. Was pressed is only true on the very first frame. So you would apply an impulse as the player presses the button, and then whilst they're in the air they can no longer press jump again, or they can't sort of hold the button down to fly into the sky, which would happen with this current setup if we just applied this to sort of the Y vector. Was released is kind of hardly ever used, but it could be used sometimes. Yeah, so let's start with the alternative controls. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to expand this part where I say move in this direction when the S key is pressed, and I'm going to put 2 bars, which in JavaScript language means or. So if the S key is pressed, or, and I'm just going to copy this whole block and paste it here, or maybe key down. So I can use the number keys here, and I can apply this to all of these. So W would be up, I need to close that bracket out, don't I? I've not got enough brackets, so just be careful of that. D is right. And A is left. So I'll save that and then jump in here, and now I can use my number keys to move the character around, and I can also use my WASD. So we've kind of made like this weird like multiplayer game where you and your friend can sit at the keyboard and control the same character. Maybe you've like got to collect different coloured pickups or something like that. Okay, so that's different controls. Exposing variables, so I need to remember how to do this. But basically, what we're going to do is we're going to write a variable at the top of the script, right at the top of the script. So basically here, under the first line, which defines the script name, I believe, you say player movement, because that's the name of our script, dot attributes, and you can see that the text is already coming up in the library, dot add, open brackets, quotation marks, and then you name it. So I'm just going to call this movement speed, and it's going to look for another variable, which is like the type of the type of data that we're going to put in here. You can kind of see as I'm writing, you've got this sort of tooltip that says you've got the string name and then the arguments, and then these are the different types of things that you can put in. So you could say, I want a string, I want a number. We actually want a number, so I'm going to just type in type colons and then number. And that should do it. So the way that we can check this immediately, without even using this variable, is we go back into our game, and we go down to our script, and we hit this pass button, and we can see that the movement speed has got a field here. So we can say, I want this to be 20. And it's not going to do anything yet because we actually aren't using this number yet. But if I come and if I grab that movement speed and I start inserting it into my code, so movement speed, negative movement speed, negative movement speed. I think that's right. Oh no, it's not right. We need to say this dot movement speed. That's what we need to do. That would have been embarrassing. Right, let's see if this works. So now this should be, our character should be much faster when we move around, because I've changed the movement speed to 20. And you can play with that, but basically you can just grab this thing here and you can scrub it from left to right. Let's put it at 2 or 1.5 and it should be really slow. I think it's so slow it's not even moving. Make it 5. Moves quite slow. Make it 60. Okay, so that's working. Let's leave this at 10. Okay, so we've made a variable now, and that means that we can just change that one number, and it will start to, and it will make everything in the script update, which is useful. Exposing variables, we've kind of grazed across the concept of that. So if I want to sort of press a button to rotate the character, that's going to be an if statement that says, what button should I use for, I think I can use Q and E for rotation. This dot at keyboard is pressed, and then PC dot key underscore Q. Right, let's try that. So when Q is pressed, we're going to do something. We're going to say this dot entity dot rigid body. So exactly the same as the movement, but when we start writing apply, we've got all of these options: apply force, apply impulse, apply torque, and apply torque impulse. So force is just moving along an axis, and torque is rotating around an axis. And then an impulse is just like I guess, I don't see what the difference between an impulse is and just sort of detecting the initial frame of the button being pressed, but so I don't often use it, but I'm sure it's useful in some regards. Okay, so apply torque, and then we want to rotate around the Y, so let's just say 0. We'll give it a big number to start with so that we can see some movement. Let's try that. So nothing is going to happen, and actually the funny thing is right now we wouldn't be able to tell if anything's happening because our character is perfectly symmetrical in the y-axis, so we're going to need to add something to it. So let's go add a cone. We're just adding this cone to our capsule, and then you can press 2, 3, and 1, 1, 2, and 3 on your keyboard to sort of cycle between these different movement options. So you can sort of say move, and you can grab these little corner pieces to move it in 2 axes. And I'm just going to give it a big honking nose. I'm going to, and then you can scale it down a little bit. If you grab the middle bit, you scale it in every single axis. Right, let's put it there. So this is just a renderer. It doesn't have any collision. I think that's good because it's not going to sort of topple us over or anything like that. But I can now tell which way it's facing, and that's useful. So what is the next thing to do? Yes, the next thing to do is, you might have noticed if I jump into the editor right now and press Q, it doesn't rotate. If you remember back in lesson 1, when we fixed the fact that it fell over, we gave it angular factor of 0 in x, y, and z. We actually want y to have an angular factor of 1. So basically what we were doing is we were asking it to rotate by a value that we then multiplied by 0, which is like this angular factor. And if you multiply anything by 0, you get 0, so we were asking it to rotate at 0 velocity. So this should work now. There we go, and it never stops. So I've released the button quite a long time ago, and we have 0 angular dampening, it seems like. Angular dampening 0. So let's set that to 0.9. Let's see if that's enough. Physics can be quite freaky, so it slows, but not nearly fast enough for my liking. So I'm going to go down and I'm going to change the angular dampening to 0.99. Now if I release the button, it should slow pretty quickly. It's actually like still not fast enough. I wonder if I just set that to 1 then. 0.99 seems pretty high. Okay, so 1 is like it moves when I press it. It feels very responsive. I might actually try and see if I can go like 0.999 to just get like a little bit of that ease out. I'm also probably applying too much, so 50 is probably really high. So if I set it to 20. A good rule when you're trying to like dial in these variables is just like double it or half it, double it or half it. And then you can split the difference when you sort of like iterate on the next lap, as it were. And that seems to be, I don't know what I just pressed there. What have I done here? Go back to my editor. That's kind of cool. Okay. So now I can rotate. And what was the last thing that we wanted to look at? Oh yeah, is pressed. So I'm going to just add some comments. So this is like movement. This is rotation. and then underneath this we can do something like jump. So if this dot app dot keyboard is pressed, PC dot key space, is that right? Yes. Okay. If you press the space bar, then this dot entity apply force 0.100.0. And then of course I said we were going to do is pressed, we're going to do was pressed. I'm just going to go back to the library to see if was pressed. Cool. So it should just apply it for one frame, which is why I put quite a lot of, yeah, so 100 over one frame is actually not that substantial. But we can do something like, we can make a new variable here, which is turn speed, and then we can also make jump. I don't think it's jump height, but I might just call it jump height. It's like jump power. And then we can stick these into our scripts down here. Which means that we can like key these in from the comfort of our pretty editor as opposed to living in code world. So turn speed was 20 and this was like 100, but I'm just going to change it to 200 and see what happens. Ah, jump height is not defined. That's because I just wrote the word jump height instead of this dot jump height. Not quite used to JavaScript just yet. We've got a little jump and we are turning. And then I would apply the rotation in the other direction. So that would be Q and E is my other key. And then I would just say negative this turns. Okay, cool. So that's probably going to do it for this session, and then I'm not sure what we'll look at in the next one, but thanks, bye.